Welcome to our session. It's been a wonderful day, and I want to thank all of you who are here because you are true warriors, sticking with us through the end. So throughout the day, we heard quite a bit about disruption, but we also heard that we need money to make things happen. And our panel today is going to be focusing on what some of us have become reliant on, and that is raising taxes to fund transportation infrastructure investments. My name is Nuria Fernandez. I am the General Manager, CEO for the Valley Transportation Authority in Santa Clara County. I'm also serve as your APTA Vice Chair. And I'm also a card-carrying member of the Self-Help Coalition in California. And that is, we are counties that many years ago decided that we wanted to raise sales tax so that we could then use that money to improve the transportation infrastructure in our own communities. We did not just want to rely on the state government and on the federal government. And Santa Clara County was the first self-help county in not only California, but in the entire United States. So we're very excited about that. That was 40 years ago with our 1976 measure that raises 1/2 cent sales tax in perpetuity. So today I have a distinguished panel of members who with a varied number of years of experience in politics and advocacy. And what I thought I would do is provide a little background on each of them, but as I ask them a question so we can get things moving. Because the other thing I need to let you know is that our session is only going to last another 55 minutes. So we need to get going here. I have Josh Cohen, and Josh is the Executive Director or Campaign Manager for APTA Center for Transportation Excellence. So thank you for joining us, Josh. The Center for Transportation Excellence believes that public transportation wins bipartisan support because it grows the economy, creates jobs, and also reduces poverty and connects communities. So with all of those positive attributes, why is it so difficult to convince people that they have to support measures for transit? This year you tracked 38 ballot measures. They were all specifically linked to public transit. We heard earlier in the day that leading up to the election on November 6th, 13 of 16 of those measures passed. And then on November 6th, another 17 of 20 passed, giving us a win rate of 83% for measures this year, which is significant. 83% is a good rate. So tell us a little bit about, if you could just unpack that for us. What was it like working or tracking these measures? What did you find that was unique? Some pros and cons about the things that people did, and what made them so winnable?
That was quite a handful there. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you. So a couple of things. So one, from No on Prop 6 to Hillsborough in Florida, Hillsborough County, in Broward County, in Kansas City, in the Detroit suburbs, in what I think will soon be San Mateo, in New Mexico, there were ballot measures across the board that were really successful. 83% is about 10 points higher than we have seen historically. We are still unpacking why people made the decisions that they made. I think that's it's certainly complicated. One thing that I think we did see was that that voters in general wanted to affect change in their communities. And I think that the ballot measures themselves did a really good job of connecting local change, local economic growth to what effect essentially is in some ways a sacrifice, right? A little bit of money out of their pocket at the pump, tolls, some property taxes, but it's an investment in their community, it's an investment in their jobs, accessibility to a whole host of issues. And I think that the the infrastructure community did a really great job of selling that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. But these are all the things that we celebrate, right? When we talk about public transportation, what it does, quality of life is always at the forefront. But yet there were 6 measures that did not pass.
Yeah.
And what did we learn from that?
So it's tough to you don't want to overlearn and you don't want to learn the wrong lessons. In Colorado, for example, there were two measures that were basically that abutted each other, and you read through the language, they weren't. It wasn't totally clear what people were voting on. I don't know. I guess you know what, I'm reticent to sort of attribute sort of surface level analysis. By and large, ballot measures outpaced, especially in November, outpaced congressional turnout for the winner. Huh? They also, many of the winning ballot measures were also well-funded, well-organized, and were based on a broad-based coalition. It wasn't just public transportation. It was infrastructure. It was roads, bridges. It was multimodal. And I think having that broad-based coalition sort of deflects the target. It makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, many of us have learned that it has to be really a grouping of different modalities so that you can appeal to different segments of the voting population and communities. But there were lessons and nuggets that I assume people will be drawing from, and we may see those very same communities that were not successful come back again. Our other presenter today is Michael Quigley, and Michael is the Executive Director of the California Alliance for Jobs. The Alliance for Jobs is a partnership between labor and management, so that's a pretty neat thing. And it spends, I know that you all care about the issues around transportation infrastructure, investment, what it does to manufacturing, the opportunity to create jobs, et cetera. So this thing, you started back in 2008. That was really a high watermark year. That was the year that Prop A passed, funding high-speed rail. And fast forward 10 years later, we have Proposition 6 that is trying to reverse a decision, I guess a law that was passed and then signed into law in 2017 by Governor Brown, which will generate $54 billion over 10 years in gas tax money for significant transportation projects. And you're sitting, you have a front row seat, and this theater, the lights are turned off, and someone says, not so fast, we're going to spoil your party. So what happened, and how did you overcome?
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important things to recognize is that Prop 6, as Mr. Hernandez alluded to, started because of SB1. And the backlash from that was really initially a Republican idea where they wanted to use that as a leverage point in this most recent election. In particular, there were 7 House Republicans in California seats who had they had won their reelection, but their district had voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And those 7 Republicans were the top targets. And at the time in California, there was 14 Republicans in the House, and so that was a sizable number of their constituents. And so some of their consultants came up with this idea that if we put the gas tax repeal on the ballot, that will become a turnout driver, and that will get Republicans to the polls, and that will get those candidates reelected. And by essentially defunding California's infrastructure, they can then benefit themselves politically. And fortunately for us, the voters saw through that. We were able to create a very broad-based coalition using our partners in local government, my industry and the construction industry, and unions and management and equipment suppliers and material suppliers. The strength and breadth of our coalition from the city councils who overwhelmingly across the state, we had a majority of the cities who passed initiatives and resolutions at a local level opposing Prop 6, majority of the counties. So we ended up having a coalition that had over 600 members, organizations, all in opposition to Prop 6. And so it was much bigger than just the construction industry. It really was through the base of local government and construction building this coalition, as Josh was talking about, and then connecting that back to other people's lives. And so the voters were able to see through all of this. ultimately defeating Prop 6 in this November ballot. We're still counting votes in California. We're still going to count them for another week or so. But we defeated Prop 6 by about 10 points on election night. As of last night, we were at 13.7 margin. So our numbers are going up. And in fact, as of yesterday, the last of that seventh Republican, David Valadao, has now slipped in behind in the polls. So it's a complete backfire for Republicans in that they tried to go after infrastructure, and what ended up happening is that the voters saw through that, rejected that idea, and then ultimately rejected the Republicans who had put it on the ballot. So now there's only 7 Republicans left in all of California, and that's it's you think about how many members there are from that state. That's a very limited delegation, and now we're moving forward, and we have a very strong mandate from the voters to deliver these projects and make good on our promises. And so I think for us, we've moved past this threat, and we're now in a stronger position, I think, than we've ever been in terms of California infrastructure. Because one of the things we didn't want to talk about this during the campaign, but SB 1 is for perpetuity. There is no sunset. And starting in 2020, there's actually a CPI adjustment. So we'll maintain its relative value going forward. We'll never have to have this fight again over a series of transportation taxes. And how that bill was structured as well, it wasn't just a gas tax. The gas tax was used as the leverage point, the lightning rod, the third rail. But the SB 1 actually was a whole series of taxes and fees on gasoline that went to the roads, some diesel sales tax that goes to fund transit, and a car registration fee increase, an electrical registration fee, electrical vehicle registration fee. So there's many different elements to this, and that money then gives us different flexibilities to use for different sources. And so transit now has a dedicated revenue source that's going to create about $1 billion a year on ongoing revenue for transit that didn't exist before this. And again, that is for perpetuity. So for us in California, we're looking at this as we've really we've turned a major corner, and going forward over the next decades, we're going to have a lot of new infrastructure built. Our roads are going to get a lot better, and our bridges are going to be repaired, and there's going to be a lot of new transit projects being constructed up and down the state. And ultimately, the voters are going to get what they paid for, because in addition to Prop 6, we actually had another ballot measure that we were successful in passing in the June ballot. Now, it was much more low intensity in terms of there was no opposition. We passed that with 81% of the vote, and that was Prop 69, and that was a constitutional protection measure for this money. So future legislators can't divert and steal this dollar as well. So the voters, we actually had 2 major initiatives and passed them both successfully, and that's really set us on a very positive course for a better outlook for our future.
Well, thanks a lot for the backdrop on the political motivation behind Prop 6. But inquiring minds want to know, how did you frame the no vote?
Right.
It was very awkward. It was to repeal a tax,
right.
So they wanted everyone to vote yes, and mostly when you vote yes, it's because you want something positive. So how did you frame, what strategy was used to frame it as a no?
That's a good question, because I mean, fundamentally, what they wanted to do, the proponents of Prop 6 wanted to do, was frame this as a Sacramento tax increase. They didn't want to talk about projects, they didn't want to talk about benefits, they didn't want to talk about needs. They just wanted to say, look what they did, they raised your taxes again. And no, the money's not going to the roads. You'll never see a dime from this. And they just sort of had these absolute positions. And the people who ultimately became the mouthpiece in particular was this right-wing radio talk show host out of San Diego. And he really became the face of the repeal effort. And he didn't have any really good grasp of transportation issues. He couldn't talk policy. He didn't have an understanding of what was actually going on. He just wanted to nail this as a red meat issue for Republican-based voters. And that ultimately allowed us I think, to really redefine through our campaign. We were much better funded, obviously. We spent about $50 million to defeat Prop 6. So we were much better funded. But how we're able to do that was by framing this actually as a local streets and roads initiative. And so we created, instead of running a statewide overriding message where we ran the same ad, we created about 5 or 6 different sub-regions based off the media markets in California. And we wrote the same ads, but then used different scripts that were localized. So people in San Diego saw a version of our television ads that talked about San Diego projects specifically and what San Diego would lose if Prop 6 was passed. People in Sacramento got their version, people in the Bay Area, and so on and so on. And because we localized it, it turned this away from a Sacramento frame and into, okay, I know that project. I drive on that road. Oh, I ride BART, and all those sort of things. Then turned it into something that actually mattered to the individual voter. And on top of that, we used a different sort of messenger than we've ever used on any sort of infrastructure campaign. Historically, when we're asking for something, we're trying to sell the benefits and asking people to believe in the accountability and the outcome. In this case, we were talking about what people stood to lose. And having transportation professionals or construction industry guys in hard hats or something along those lines, we figured out pretty early that wasn't the right messenger. And so we were able to build, as part of our coalition, some very close relationships with police and fire and the California Highway Patrol and their unions, and actually bring them into the fold. And those public safety voices became our primary messengers on the campaign. So we had firefighters actually talking about, there's over 1,600 deficient bridges in California. And police officers, CHP officers, one of our ads we did was with a retired CHP captain, and it was a ride-along ad where he was literally in the car driving along a highway, the camera's and he's talking to the camera, and he's talking about how road conditions and road safety impact people's lives and how he's seen that over his career. So we personalized it in a way that created, I think, a perception in the voters' minds that, one, things aren't going to get better if we vote yes, things are going to get worse, and we're going to lose these projects that actually matter to me. And that, I think, is what ultimately got people thinking differently about it. And then when they saw the strength and breadth of our coalition, we had everything from the California Chamber of Commerce to the Sierra Club to a host of other groups, everyone you can imagine. We had some form represented in that coalition. So there was really, I think, those were the 3 main components: was localization, using the right messenger, and then the strength of the coalition. I think really is what voters saw, and they realized that this was a bad idea. It wasn't good for the future of California, and that's why they were able to resoundingly reject Prop 6 in November.
Yeah, well, clearly the outcome was tremendous. So we're all very excited of what has happened. And even those who were not supporting it are going to benefit from it.
Absolutely.
That's the beauty about our democracy. Our next presenter is Scott Smith, and Scott is the CEO of Valley Metro in Arizona, I guess
Metro Phoenix.
Mesa, the Phoenix area. He also is the former president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Scott is certainly a veteran of many political campaigns. He ran for mayor of Mesa successfully twice, and he also did a little bid for governor of Arizona. So we could have been having a different conversation here.
Yeah, obviously that one was not quite as successful
Yeah,
as the
but that's
mayor's
okay.
race.
We're
But I
delighted.
found out when you lose an election, they don't even give you a ribbon. It really sucks. It's just like, okay, you're done. Goodbye.
So you've been, but you've also been a very consistent transit advocate throughout your career. So that's been great and well received. So what are some of the enduring lessons of running campaigns, particularly transit measures, and you are experiencing that?
Well, I think any election, and what you've heard, not directly but indirectly, is elections are personal. People vote their interests. That's a challenge for transit because in probably every community in this country, except for maybe New York, more than half the people who commute to work and that do not use transit. In most of our communities, it's a small 10 to maybe 20%, maybe 30%, which means you have to convince a supermajority of people in a community that transit is a good investment. That transit not only is a good investment, it's a good investment for somebody who doesn't use transit. Now, generally what we do is we, as you heard, we package it. And we put things in that package that people can say, well, I'm not even going to think about transit because darn it, this has got street money in it. It's got bridge money in it. It's got public safety. Whatever it is, we can get people to maybe not even think about the transit side. Sometimes, though, we run heavily on transit. In the city of Phoenix 3 years ago, they ran a campaign to increase transportation funding, and it was heavy on transit and light rail, and it won. And that gets back to the other things. How do you get people who don't generally use this service to say yes and to personalize it? Well, in any campaign, there are two major motivators. You know, fear is always a motivator. You used fear successfully. When I say fear, don't get all, people get crazy when I say fear. Fear can be something as simple as what you used in yours, which was fear-driven. Not fear-mongering, that's different. The fear that I'm going to lose something good, okay? And that's a motivator. And that gets people to say, wait a second, I want to protect what I have, which also plays off of the other one, which is to be aspirational. What we found is that when people vote yes on transportation, they're afraid that their bridges are falling apart. But what if there are no bridges? Like in Phoenix, we've had 2 major regional taxes, and our transit system is basically run by one regional tax, a half-cent sales tax that's split between freeway, streets, roads, and transit. 1/3 of that goes to transit. And by a series of local taxes, like the one in Phoenix, and a couple other cities have dedicated transportation and or transit taxes. How do you convince somebody where there is no bridge to build that bridge? Where there is no bus service, where there isn't light rail? How do you do that? And that gets to the second great motivator, and that's aspiration. You know, that's the hope you can believe in, or make America great. Now, that's both fear and aspiration, I guess. We don't know what it is. We're still trying to figure out which one that is. I think it changes about 4 times a day, but actually aspiration. And what we talk about is you also used it in that, because what people generally agree on, and it's completely non-denominational, non-partisan, is that investments in infrastructure reap benefits to a community. And that I, as an individual, am part of that. You know, that's why we talk about creating jobs. I may have a job, but I think people getting jobs are good. Why? Because I want my kids to have jobs, and I want my grandkids to be able to stay here and not have to move off to some godforsaken place like California to get a job. You know, we really believe that these things are good, and we generally believe that investment in infrastructure is good. So what happens when all of a sudden we don't have those things there? And this is what's happening in Phoenix right now. This morning, a group led by our good friends, the Americans for Prosperity, filed petitions to put an initiative on the ballot to undo part of the election that was passed overwhelmingly 3 years ago. Now, they've taken a separate approach. Rather than bundling it, which is what it was, they've carved it out, and it's a very simple proposition. Take the money that you approved 3 years ago that was going to light rail projects, and kill those light rail projects and fix the streets. That's a real simple, and that's an easy ask. They got 40,000 signatures in about 3 weeks. And the sales pitch was, hey, listen, we're going to spend billions on light rail projects, and they got them mostly in the sections of the city where, guess there was no light rail, okay? And you see how crappy the street is out there? Doesn't it seem stupid to you that we're spending billions on light rail 10 miles away and we can't fix your street in front of you? How about if we killed those projects and fixed the potholes? Where do I sign? And the reason why I bring this up is that fear and aspiration have now almost, or might be, turned on their heads. Because this is the first time that I'm aware of, there may be another one where, and I think the reason why AFP has gotten involved is that they're doing a couple things new here. They're actually trying to undo an election that was passed 3 years ago. And what they're doing is that they're carving out the portion that they know is a tough sell. It's a tough sell to sell rail to people who will believe they'll never use rail, or who are in communities that are distant from rail. And we can do it, and we've been successful doing it, but it's a harder sell, especially when you give them a choice. Fix the pothole in front of your house, or the rail 15 miles away that you're never going to ride. Wow, that's a tough one. And so they're trying to undo an election that has been, not only has the city of Phoenix voted once, 3 elections to say yes to transit funding. All 3 of those elections were bundled elections, though. They were transportation-wide. So they're coming back and saying, let's undo what the voters did, and let's give you an honest choice. Because you weren't given an honest choice before. They ask you to build new bridges and to build transit also, to build rail especially. That's not an honest election in their mind. Let's be honest. Streets or light rail, you choose. So I think that what we're looking at is that even though what a great 80%, it's based on a formula which works because most people believe in infrastructure investment. Why? Because they can see the tangible benefits. That's if you have accountability with that. We've learned that blank check transportation elections lose. There's accountability involved, meaning here's what I'm going to spend it on, here's the audit process or the review process or the accountability, the transparency, whatever buzzword you want to use. But what they're trying now is they're going to carve that out and they're going to say, okay, we're going to give you a choice that is even more personal for you. And it's going to be interesting how this plays out because what we're going to use, and we haven't sat down to figure out what this campaign is going to look like, but I can tell you, and I can get my pros here, is we're going to talk about, as I'm shaping this, the first thing I say is fixing a pothole is a Band-Aid that gives you 10 years. And there was never a job created after the pothole came in. An investment in transportation, even light rail, is a generational investment. And it not only creates jobs, it creates an economy, it creates opportunity. People actually understand that because they've seen it happen. And we also are very clear that we don't segregate or separate transit from transportation. The governor of Arizona put together a task force a couple years ago to try and figure out a way to fund transportation projects across the state. By the way, the state of Arizona doesn't give 1 penny to transit in Arizona. All transit is funded both regionally and locally, nothing from the state. And one of the noted economists in Arizona who really is looked upon for economic development, his opening statement was, let me be perfectly clear. In Arizona, transportation includes streets, highways, freeways. Mm-hmm. Is that clear? Now, what did he not include in there? No transit, certainly no rail. Oh, heaven forbid bike lanes or trails or walkable or any of that kind of, touchy-feely stuff. Now, he is not alone in that belief, and most of our opponents believe that component, and we have allowed them for years and years to say transportation and not completely talk about how transit fits into that. We also use nice little words that we understand, like multimodal. I've learned as a mayor, and when I walk out and I say multimodal, how many people in the audience know what that is? 2. Oh, yeah, okay. That's about 100% more than I thought. 1, me. I learned this when I was talking to a group of Republican women, the Republican Women's Club of the East Valley. And I kept talking about economic development. I'm a mayor and economic development is important for me. And I looked out and I learned how to read a crowd like I'm reading you right now, and you all got blank faces. So I know. I learned out, and there was nothing but blank faces. And they go, what in the hell is economic? None of them knew what economic development was. So here I am talking a language that they never understood. And I'm going, golly, this is one of the most important things I do. And I got an audience that doesn't understand what it is. And I finally hit on something because beforehand, I remember one of the women was talking about her son who had graduated from college and he had moved to Denver. And how devastated she was because her son moved. And I said, why did your son move to Denver? Well, he's in a certain field and that's where the jobs are. And all of a sudden it hit me. That's economic development. I said, okay, how many of you have children that have graduated from college? We're Republican women now, so most of them said here. Where do they live? Austin, Salt Lake, Silicon Valley, Denver. Why? Because that's where the jobs in the areas, high tech, those kind of things. They weren't in Arizona. Does that mean your grandkids are there? Yes. How many of you would like to keep your grandkids in Mesa, Arizona? That's economic development. I want your grandkids to stay home. I want them to stay home. So what we found is when we talk transportation, we have to always include transit, make it personal when they don't use it, but we have to somehow get them convinced that this entire system is aspirational because it keeps their grandkids home. And because it creates a better life for them in that sense. We find out whatever quality of life, that's why it's important in the localization. Because in front of this club, it might have been their keeping their kids home. Yeah. If we go to a different place, it might be something else. The ability to take bikes out in the, whatever it is, you figure out what connects with them and why they should invest in that issue that would improve their lives. And you know, for us, I'll come back and report to you in 6, 8, 9 months, whenever this election is, about how successful we were in taking a carved out single issue, potholes or light rail. You know, a hole in the street versus a black hole financially, because we know that rail and transit is a money sucker that benefits nobody but those poor people who should be able to buy a car anyway. Now, I say that, but you know how many times I've heard that? You've heard it too. Got to get beyond that. We're going to do our best to shape that message in a way that we can get people to say. And I'm confident that we can do that because I've seen the success. You know, when you get 80%, when you get items in California that have to get a supermajority to win, and they're winning, we found the sweet spot in that message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, one of the things that we can do as general managers is to talk more about a transportation network rather than just talking about transportation, because immediately everyone goes to highways and roads. But if we talk about a network that has the rail and the roads and the freeways, expressways, bicycle, pedestrian, I think that kind of starts to bring it together. But you know, on that same score, Scott, I know that you and your team are working tirelessly to make sure that people are educated, understand the value, as the rest of you have through these ballot measures. But what is the role for outreach and engaging the community so that they can also help amplify that message and not just rely on you and what you can do with your scarce resources?
My father was a school superintendent who passed many bond issues, and he never lost one. And I said, what is one of your secrets? He said 2 things. Number 1, I always engage the community. Number 2, every day is the first day of the next bond campaign. I approach every day as though it's part of the campaign. And what that meant was whatever outreach you have, however you connect with someone, you have to be cognizant that you are shaping people's opinion and view of what your system is. So quality of service, you know, we've seen it all the time. What's the driver of ridership? Quality of service, consistency, dependability, right? And that gets down to cleanliness, crime. Our biggest challenge right now in Phoenix, Arizona is not the fact that our trains are running 98% on time and we're filling 99.9% of our miles. It's there's a perception that our trains aren't safe. Now, the reality is that our crime statistics are you're very safe if you're on the light rail in Phoenix, Arizona. But that's not what people think. Why? Because they get on there, there's somebody who looks different, smells different, acts different, who's scary, and they don't ride anymore. Now, what is that person going to do when they are asked to vote to invest another $500 million or $1 billion or $5 billion in a light rail? Oh, that's an easy one. Hell no. Okay? So every day when we go out, even our advertising, we've changed. We used to do marketing to try and build ridership. I mean, this may be heresy, but I think that marketing to build ridership is the biggest waste of money there is. I'm sorry. I think if we're going to market, we need to do one thing. Put the money better in improving your service. But most of all, put that money into letting people know what you're doing. And that can be anything good that's happening in your system, even fixing problems. We're spending a lot of time not only fixing our security issue, but we're spending money in the marketing to telling people what we're doing. We don't want them to find out by happen chance. When we do an outreach public service, we always make sure we sell the system. And so that you can do as part of your ordinary thing. It's your approach. We don't just go out and talk about a specific issue. We always make sure that we talk about the system, how the system is benefiting the community. We never miss an opportunity to talk about our system, because this may be our only direct contact with that person, and we want them to feel good about what we have or are offering or how we're trying to serve the community and build this this network and this system they can be proud of. And that's how I would say, that's our public outreach, is that we look every day as that this is the first day of the next campaign, And why are people who aren't riding your system, or those who are, why are they going to support you? Because they have confidence in you, they believe you're valuable, and they've had a good experience with you. So spend your time and effort not only doing that, but letting people know that's what's happening. As my father said also, there's nobody that's going to toot your horn for you. There are 5 million people that are going to tell you everything you're doing wrong. And with social media, we also spend a lot of time on social media countering negatives and misinformation and trying to put good stuff out there, because we have to work about getting that out there. Because if you get to the campaign, it's either too late or it's a heavy lift to change people's perception. Because remember, at that point in time, you've got all the people on the other side that are telling you, that are reinforcing their bad ideas. These people are losers, they waste your money, why would you support them? And you've got to now try and win them over. If they've got a good feeling of you, they say, well, God, that's not my experience. It gives you a better chance.
Well, that's certainly a good way to go. And coming back now to ballot measures, Josh, in addition to bundling transit with other things, how about ideas such as having a citizens watchdog or some kind of reporting to create transparency? Because we heard earlier, you cannot just have a ballot measure that's asking for give me a blank check, trust me, I will deliver on what I promise. So that layer of an oversight, is that important?
Well, so I think it's a really great question. It's a great follow-up, especially given Scott's point. The deadline on election day, when a ballot measure is passed, is not the finish line, right? That's the first leg in a marathon. Then you go and you do your due diligence and you begin expanding, refurbishing, and it's critical that you bring your voters, your constituents, along for the ride. Pun intended, the transit metaphors abound. And you continue to sell the virtues of what you are doing. How is it benefiting the community? And frankly, Scott talked about the grandmothers in the room. I could do an hour seminar on the anatomy of that riff right there. It was perfect. It connected the values, it defined the problem, it identified a solution, and it did it through a narrative arc. It was a really good way of connecting to people. And I think when we are talking about public transit, both in terms of the ballot measure itself, and then as the projects get underway, it's really important to continue to sell the virtues, to continue to sell the benefits. Transparency is obviously important. I think more and more people want to know that their hard-earned tax dollars, that their contributions aren't being squandered. So I think that is, a good government foundation in general. But I think, from a narrative perspective, from a marketing communications perspective, making sure that people continue to know why their investment is not just wise for them, but wise for their community, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Scott, did you all have a Citizens Oversight Committee on your ballot?
Yeah, and in each one of our initiatives, we've created a citizens committee. On one, there's a specific, the Phoenix one, there's a Citizens Transportation Commission that was formed specifically to monitor and it's an advisory panel for the City Council for funds that are raised by this specific tax. On the regional tax, there's actually very well-defined audit provisions that each year you have to do a public report on what the election was, how the monies were spent, and we have to report both to the public and to the state legislature. Even though they don't give us money, they make us report to them. So accountability and transparency is absolutely important. Even if no one pays attention to it, which most of the time they don't, until they want to come back and rip on you, the fact that you have that process, first of all, it does keep your eye on the ball. Secondly, it is the greatest insurance policy, because when they come back, you can say, look at what we've done. They can reach out, touch it, feel it, and it's great to be able to have that there to say. There's no downside to having that process.
Yeah. In Santa Clara County, we've had, I think, 5 ballot measures over the course of since 1976. And I can say that 2 of them, both the 1976, which was measure in perpetuity, the 2000, and now the 2016, so that's the third one, have a requirement for a Citizens Oversight Committee, and that committee meets every month, but they get their report done and then audited. So we do have a document that demonstrates where we are with every project. What has been our savior in the county in getting these measures passed is that they're very specific. We list every project that's going to be funded and how much funding is going to be allocated to those projects or project category. So it's not this is transportation is half-cent sales tax, and we'll get $6 billion over 30 years, and we'll spend it on a variety of things. It's very clear on what the type of things that are eligible for them. But having that citizens committee and then getting their report audited and available to the public, I think that has really elevated not only the support, but then the consciousness around transparency, and now they can not only depend on what we're doing, rely on what we're doing, but we use it as a sales document as we're trying to get more support for additional funding.
I think I was a home builder before I ran got into public office, and it amazed me because I'd been a CPA and attorney before getting into home building. Like, yes, I've been a failure at a lot of things, but no, many careers. But one thing that surprised me in home building is that how many of you have bought a new home or had a home builder? But yeah, most everybody. When you walked in there, you were convinced that home builder was going to figure out every way he or she could to rip you off. I know you felt that way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It killed me when I realized that, wait, I'm trying to do something nice for you. No, you're not. You're trying to steal from me. Mm-hmm. And so when I went into elected office, it wasn't a hard transition to remember that every one of my constituents was convinced that no matter how much I promised them, no, I'm going to do this. No, you're not. You're going to steal from me. You're going to rip me off. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't hard for me to say, this is a good thing, because I just recognize that that's the natural. If you're in government and you're taxing, especially for the big dollars that we put up, they're absolutely convinced that you're going to take that and you know, bait and switch, whatever it is, you're going to funnel this to there. And so being accountable is absolutely, I think, is great, because it's the ultimate insurance policy.
Yeah, well, they have entrusted us with the tax dollars, and we want
you
to
should be accountable for it.
There's
nothing wrong with being accountable for it.
Absolutely. Let me ask a question and get the response from all of you. And so we've been very fortunate in transit, 83% this year, and we've had some years that have been successful, other years where we've lost quite a few ballot measures. But the need for transit, the backlog, $900 billion we talked about earlier, and if we take that and break it down into, 90 billion, if we break it down into our individual agencies, we've got a significant percentage of that. And we can continue going to the ballot and ask the public to give us money, but are we going to hit a peak there where there's going to be this fatigue, where we're going to start losing support? I mean, how do we address the gap between what we have and what we need, and how do we bridge that and still keep that excitement, getting people to the ballot to give us, and especially in California, the 2/3 majority that we need? Let's hear from Michael.
Well, I think that the bridging the gap is always about asking people to build on what they've done. And going back to, we're talking about citizens accountability commissions and how the success you've personally had in Santa Clara County. Part of our self-help counties was touched on earlier. In California, we have now, I believe, 24 counties that are we call self-help counties. And part of that theme that we push back the voters is promises made, promises kept. And to bridge that gap, you have to be able to show that we've taken the money that you've given us, we've been good stewards of it, delivered on our promises, provided the value back to the taxpayer, and the benefits that we said would come along with this have to be materialized as well. And then you can go back and say, look what we did with your dollar. If you give us some more dollars, here's what we're going to do with that. And then through that incremental process, which really becomes a relationship with the voter about delivering on those commitments. And the more trust you can build, and this really starts at a local level. I think that's one of the other themes you keep hearing coming up in this discussion, is that the closer you can get to the individual, whether that's through talking about individual benefits or how these improvements have actually impacted them in a positive way. The closer you can tie that back, it becomes a much easier sell the next time around. And so when you're dealing with these numbers, also, $900 billion backlog, and we have $130 billion backlog on road maintenance alone in California. But we stopped talking about that because those numbers seem. What can any individual do about that? What could even a city do about that? And those numbers are so big that it almost becomes like a pension crisis or something. We'll just push that off a little bit. Can't even deal with it. Yeah. So when you localize it and bring it down and start talking about, bus routes and operational times and things like that, and take it away from the big sort of abstract maintenance and backlog and unfunded needs, and then you just put it down into individual. Well, if we had $100 million a year extra in our district, this is everything we would do with it. And then that becomes, I think, just a different conversation with the voter, and one that ultimately builds that trust that allows you to continue to grow, and the voter will want to support more resources flowing towards your agencies.
And what Mike talked about is one of our biggest challenges. We're really good as Americans in building new things. We love new things. I also learned as a mayor that mayors love to go to ribbon cuttings. I never saw a mayor who loved to go to the refurbishment of the escalator. But I've been here in Washington to know what happens when one of WMATA's escalators quits working. They hear about it. And we tend to be one, and here's what's funny about Americans. In our personal lives, we're not like that. We don't wait till we have an abscessed tooth before we go to the dentist. Most of us go and get our teeth cleaned and we do stuff like that. But when it comes to infrastructure, we wait till the bridge falls down or we have to shut down the track, and then we pay twice as much with twice as much pain. And it's not sexy to run an election for deferred maintenance and for rebuilding that which we already built. And that's where I think the bigger challenge is, is the capacity. We're hitting that in Phoenix right now. Our first half-cent sales tax was in 1985. Before that, Phoenix had had 17 miles of freeways in Metro Phoenix. Okay? Now we have one of the best freeway systems in the entire country. It's amazing. All built in the last 33 years. Well, 30-year-old road is starting to fall apart. And so now the current tax, 20-year tax, expires in 2025. And one of our big challenges is a good chunk of this tax now is going to go to rebuild what we built in the previous 30 to 40 years. And I think we found, when we talk about things like stated good repair, stuff like that, we're hitting that in Phoenix. Our light rail system just hit 10 years old. We're so happy with that. A train car, what do you get out of it? 30 years, but at 10 years it starts to show. You start having to do major overhauls of transmissions and brake systems, all that kind of stuff. Getting people to pay for that is hard. It's not difficult to get people to buy a new car. That's great. But to rebuild so that bridge doesn't fall down, that's where the messaging you really have to dig in and talk about that aspiration. We can't talk about it, as Mike said, in engineering terms, because people don't understand. That's sort of like the economic development. So how do you talk about keeping a system right? You can point to others and say, look, we don't want, no, you don't do that. But you actually sort of can, I tell you, if I'm running a bridge safety, I talk about Minneapolis. Nothing against Minneapolis, I love Minneapolis, but that's part of we don't want to be there. We want to be aspirational in the sense that we need to keep reinventing, reinvesting, redoing. But that's a tougher sell. And I think that's almost more than, gee, give us more money so we can expand the system 2 miles. That's an easier sell than is give us money so we can take care of the existing 30 miles or 40 miles or 140, whatever it is of the system that we have.
So how about this novel idea? Should we be thinking a little differently when we put these ballot measures for new infrastructure, that a percentage of that fund goes towards the maintenance of it? I mean, you could bank it. There should not be a construction of anything new unless there's a way to pay for how we're going to maintain it.
No, we should, but once again, depending on what your governance is in your area. If you've got a group of mayors, and every region, all of you are in a region, and you got a group of city governments, whatever involvement they have in your authority or your thing, at some time or another, you're going to need to get their support. It's real tough to get the mayor over here to really give up part of this new fund money to fix the problems of the mayor over here. That's just the political realities. Regional, there's not a regional system, a regional area I know in this country that practices perfect harmony, where the city in the Northwest is more than willing to give up what the city in the Southeast is the benefits. It does not happen. We can talk about it, and I was a regional kind of mayor because I honestly believe that, if I told people, if Scottsdale sucks, which it doesn't, Mesa really has a hard time. I like Scottsdale to be Scottsdale. I like Phoenix to be a great central city. How many of my fellow mayors actually, do you think, believe me when I said that? Zero, because everyone's parochial. So I think one of our challenges is a system by its nature is truly a regional system. There's no way that you can get away from that. But the politics of any system are never purely regional. Yeah. They're always parochial. And I think it's the politics that is more difficult on the front end than it is even on the back end.
There was something that you said, and I'm a communications guy, so I'm gonna just insert a little bit of messaging. There's a communications frame where you define the problem, you empathize, you define the problem, and then you provide a solution. There's another approach, and this speaks to, and Rose has heard me harp on this quite a bit, but an aspirational frame. American communities are at our best when our public transit is fully funded. Mm-hmm. Our economy functions best. Economic opportunities are everywhere when public transit has the resources it needs to get us where we're going. There is that aspirational frame that doesn't fall into sort of a tired or old message framework. It is aspirational. It has a way of sort of neutralizing opposition while leading people to a place that they want to go. If you want to talk more about new message frames, come find me afterward. But I like that as a way of
and don't poo-poo that.
Yeah.
We tend to talk very technical in this industry. But the last two presidents, no matter what you thought about them, were elected based on aspirational, in their view, messages, and they were effective. I learned one thing once again in elected, that the psyche of a community is an incredibly powerful motivator. Mm-hmm. People want to live in a great community. I used to ask parents, how many of you, when your kids walk out the door, say, "Have a sub-average day. Please be average today." Now, I had a son that was my aspiration, but most of us, have a great day. Yeah. We don't want to live in a pit. We want to live in some place that we're proud of. And I don't care, everyone's definition of a pit is different. Home is home, but we all want to live in a place we view as great. And then we come out with an initiative that's technical in nature. That doesn't touch in with people's inner feelings. Mm-hmm. They want to live in a place, they're aspirational by nature. Yeah. They want to live in a place that's improved. And whatever message we have is easy because we have a great story. Why? Because we have hundreds of years, and in this country, 200 plus years, where infrastructure and an investment has driven our success. Whether we talk about the Erie Canal, the Transcontinental Railroad, or the interstate highway system, or whatever we want, people can look and say that these investments have helped make us great and they live in the community. That's the message. Don't discount that. Incredibly powerful. And it can easily be connected to the transit and transportation message because it's a natural connection.
And the one thing I would add to that is that when you're looking at developing a measure, it's very tempting to say, we need this, we need that, we need A, B, C, and D. Let's go put that on the ballot, and then we'll figure out how to get the voters to support it.
Yeah.
That's generally the recipe for failure. The best question is, to start with, we know we need to do some transportation improvements. Let's ask the voters what they think are the priorities first. And sometimes it may not be what the agency needs. Mm-hmm. But in those cases, you have to recognize that that's a longer term ask of the voters. You got to go do some education to get them prioritize what you need them to prioritize. But in the near term, you got to go with what's on the table. And generally, that's what the voters are willing to support. It's very difficult to change people's minds and get them to reprioritize. However, if you're moving with that, then you're swimming downstream. And you have the voters already thinking, gosh, really, we could use an extension of this line out to that community, or we know this major freeway needs to be expanded because I drive on that interchange, it's a disaster. And so when the one advice I would have is invest some early money in doing some polling, some focus groups, some community outreach before you even get to the point where you're drafting any sort of ballot language, because that is really what guides you about what's within the realm of possible. And it also means you'll have an easier path, a cheaper campaign, and you're selling a product that voters are interested in buying. And so I think that's one thing that we've done in California successfully, particularly Alliance's role in a lot of these ballot measures. Before we have a campaign, you can also use uninhibited dollars. You don't have a ballot campaign, so you don't need a PAC. You can use private donors and whatnot in unlimited amounts, because this is just educational fact-finding missions at this point. And so you can find some supportive industries. Not every state has an Alliance for Jobs, but find out who your local groups are and ask them to put up some money on the front end, raise some money on the front end, general dollars, to do this research. And it's very easy to sell to say, well, if you $10,000 or $50,000 on the front end will help us get enough information and potentially save us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in campaign costs, and give us a much better chance of success at the end of the day. And so that's, I think, an important takeaway just for everyone. And when you go and look at what you want, start with what the voters want, and then build a campaign around that.
Really
And
good
you have
advice.
a built-in campaign committee because it's their plan, or at least they think it's their plan. And so they're already out there advocating, as opposed to saying, we have this bureaucratic engineering-based plan, now we need to go find somebody to support it. And you walk into the Chamber of Commerce and everything, hey, would you support this? I guess we're supposed to, sure. If you do what Michael said, you've already got raving fans. And they will, without even being asked, they'll take the water and carry it. And oh my gosh, that is so important when you get into the actual campaign.
Very well said. We have come to the end of the line. Unfortunately, there's not enough time for questions unless there's a burning question out there. Going once, going twice. Okay, well,
We answered
Join me.
all information.
absolutely.
It's amazing.
Join me in thanking Josh, Scott, and Michael